Right now, the gym that I joined is doing a fitness whole body life challenge. And as part of that, I have to get 140 grams of protein in every single day. Something that helps with that is this amazing white bread that is made with high protein ingredients. It is so good. It has 10 to 13 grams of protein per piece, and you can't even tell that it's not regular bread. So let's go ahead and start making it. The first thing we need to do is gather our wet ingredients for this high protein bread. First, I'm going to measure out 1 cup of egg whites into a blender. And I'm using this cool new scale that I'm testing out. It's really neat. It actually calculates the macros depending on how much you put on the scale. You just find the food in the app and then you put the food on the scale and it tells you exactly what the macros are for that specific food. So I did 1 cup of egg whites in the blender, and now I'm adding an additional 1 cup of cottage cheese. As you can see in the app, I just scanned it and it showed right up with what I needed. And then I added 1 cup's worth of cottage cheese into the blender. It was just like a little bit over 1 cup, but it gave me the exact macros of what I put in. That's pretty cool. Now, next I'm putting in 1/3 of a cup of water, but that's because I'm using instant yeast today. If you have just traditional yeast, then you'll want to do 1/3 of a cup of warm water onto the side, add 1.5 teaspoons of yeast to the warm water and let that bloom before you add it to the rest of your ingredients. Now I'm going to just blend this all up until it's nice and smooth because we don't want any chunks in our bread. Now we're going on to our dry ingredients. I'm using the app again to measure out 4 2/3 cup of bread flour. And bread flour actually has more protein in it than all-purpose flour, so it's important that you use bread flour. Bread flour is also really good when making bread because it has extra gluten in it, and that gluten is also like what gives it that protein. So I measured out the flour and then I added that into the app, and it tells me exactly how many calories, how many carbs, and how many proteins that this amount of flour has, which is pretty cool. Now I'm going to go over to my Bosch bread mixer. I love this thing because it is a workhorse. It works so well for bread, and I'll never use anything else when I'm making bread. If you don't have a Bosch mixer, you can totally just use a Kitchenaid, or you can do this by hand. You'll just get a good arm workout in between. So to the Bosch, I'm going to add that bread flour, and then I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of kosher salt. Next, I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of instant yeast. And like I said, if you're not using instant yeast, then you have to bloom that yeast in that water beforehand. I like to just give all my dry ingredients a little mix in the Bosch, so I just turn that on low and let that stir for a couple minutes, or like a couple rotations until it looks like it's mixed in a little bit. After the dry ingredients are incorporated a little bit more, I'm just going to pour the contents of my blender straight into the Bosch. You'll see that it starts making a really nice dough, and you want to knead this or let this run in the mixer for about 5 to 6 minutes, or until all that dough has gone to one side of the mixer. It's a really good sign when your dough is just in one large mass and it's just traveling around that Bosch on one side. You don't want to spread over the entire mixer because this isn't a batter, it's a dough. We want it to come together. You want the dough to be tacky but not sticky. What that means is if I grab a little piece of dough and it sticks really bad to my fingers, then I need to add a little bit of extra flour. Since I used the mixer and not kneaded it by hand and I didn't have extra flour on my work surface, I'm just going to add a little bit of flour in about a tablespoon at a time until I get the texture that I want. Now you can see that the dough is tacky but not sticky. That means that I'm still getting a little bit of stick to my fingers, but not like way sticky and it's like hard to get off my fingers. Now that our dough is done, I'm going to just cover this and then let it rise for about an hour in a warm place or until the dough has doubled in size. If you want, you can also put this dough in the Instant Pot, cover it, and put it on the low yogurt setting, and that will be a really nice draft-free, warm place for it to proof. You can also just put this whole bowl in your oven with the oven light on, and that's a really great way to proof bread dough. After the dough has risen and doubled in size, I like to just deflate it straight in my Bosch. So I'll just turn it on the pulse setting 1 or 2 times and like deflate the dough. And now we are ready to shape our dough. I didn't want one large, massive loaf this time, so I'm actually splitting my dough into 2. So my macros will be cut in half. However, you just do it however you want. You could even do this in little rolls if you want, or you could even make cinnamon rolls with this dough. It's very versatile. Before I shape my dough though, I am going to prep the pans that we're going to put them in. As you can see, I have a glass pan and I also have a metal pan. You can use either one. But I like lining my pans with parchment paper for this recipe just to ensure that nothing sticks, because that would be tragic. A little hack for this is if you put your bread pan on a sheet of parchment paper with enough room on the sides to cover the walls of the pan. If you take some scissors and you cut towards the center of the pan after you've put it on there, and you have these little like flaps on the side, then those will fit perfectly in your pan, and you just have to kind of overlap them on the edges, and then it will fit perfectly in your pan. Just repeat this with the other pan if you choose to do so, and then I like to grease these to make sure that they won't stick as well. All right, now let's get on to shaping our dough. Like I said, I'm splitting my dough in half today, so I'm just using a bench scraper and cutting it into 2 equal pieces. Now I'm just using my fingers and kind of spreading the dough out and smoothing it out as best as I can. Once I get it into a rectangle shape about the same size as my loaf pan, now I'm going to start rolling it up from the edges very tightly and making a nice loaf or log of dough. Now it's really important that you pinch all the seams of your bread dough. That means the seam where it comes together as well as the ends. And make sure that your loaf doesn't burst open while cooking, because this isn't a loaf of sourdough where you have like a nice score mark on purpose where then that air expands and it creates that really beautiful ear. This is not that. We really want these loaves to stay nice and intact and beautiful, so make sure you pinch all of the edges of your bread dough and your loaves before they start proofing. Now that I've done that with both of my loaves, we are going to just put them in the loaf pans and then cover them with a tea towel or something else to make sure that they don't dry out, and we'll let them rise for about 30 to 60 minutes depending on how warm your house is. You'll know that they're ready to bake when you press into the dough with your finger and the dough does not spring right back and fill that hole up. That hole should stay, and that's when you know that your bread is ready to bake. I've preheated my oven to 400 degrees and I'm going to add both of the loaves in there. They cook for 20 to 25 minutes, and I like to add a large piece of foil over the top about 10 to 15 minutes into cooking, because otherwise this recipe does brown quite a bit on the top, so I want to make sure that they don't get too brown. I set the timer for 22 minutes this time. I checked the temperature of both of my loaves and one of them was done, but the other one was not. So that is another reason why I absolutely love cooking with temperature and not just by time or by look, because if you look at it, this loaf actually looks done and the other one was done, but this one just needed a little bit of extra time. So with bread, you always want to make sure you get that internal temperature to a minimum of 190 degrees, but I like to go for more like 200 degrees. And then you'll know that your bread is not doughy and underdone in the center. If you're going to do all of that work, you definitely do not want to end up with a gross, undercooked, gummy product. Of course, I always use my Thermapen 1 for this. This is the only thermometer I will ever use, and I have the whole ThermoWorks brand line. I love it so much and I trust it endlessly. You'll want to remove the bread loaves from the loaf pan after they're done cooking and set the bread on a cooling rack. The reason you want to make sure that you take it out of the loaf pan is because otherwise there will be condensation from the heat of the bread, and then your bread will get soggy in the pan, and you definitely don't want that. Here's another thing is you need to make sure whenever you make bread to cool it completely before you cut into it. If you don't let it cool completely, all that hot air inside of the bread, when you cut into it, it will kind of like gel together and it gets kind of gummy. You definitely don't want that. So make sure that you let your bread rest and cool. It's a little bit hard, I know, but it's worth it in the end. Now that we have our beautiful cottage cheese, high protein bread, you can just eat this any way you like with some butter and a little bit of salt. Or I like to make French toast with this because it's like extra protein, but you can use this for sandwiches. You can cut it up and make croutons, and it's a little bit of a healthier, better, high protein alternative to just normal store-bought white bread. Thanks so much for watching today. And if you like this video, make sure you watch this high protein egg drop soup that's so simple to make and super high protein. And if you like these high protein recipes, let me know and I'll make some more. Thanks for watching, bye.